just giving praise and honor to the good Lord, um, and to also thank all of you for your continued prayers, the support, the love gifts that have been sent to me. Um, David and Pam came by one day and brought me stuff to make smoothies and probiotics and different things. And I'm just so grateful, so very, very grateful to be able to say that I finished the 10 days worth of antibiotics last Wednesday. And every day since this past Sunday, I have been feeling stronger and stronger and stronger. I'm coughing much less, as you can see here. No fatigue, no headache. Um, I just feel like the Lord has restored my health. And
Did you
I
make
give
the tea?
all the praise and honor and glory for that. I do have, my heart rate does tend to go up. So, I mean, sometimes my heart rate will go up as high as 132 beats, 135 beats per minute, just on a little exertion. But I'm claiming in Jesus' name that that's going to be gone too in just a little while. So I am here to say that, God truly is a healer and a restorer, and I am very grateful. And I would just say, Daryl, I know you're going to talk on this some more, but if I may share with everybody, uh, if you're like me and you need to lose, a couple of, you need to lose a little inches around the waist or in other places, now is a good time to really focus in on getting their weight in control, eating healthy, doing all the things that we know the Lord has, the message, the health message that God has given us, because that's the thing that is really going to help us too to fight this um, awful virus. So again, I thank everybody, but thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah. Amen.
Peanut, did you make your tea?
I did. I was doing some of everything because the last time that we spoke, my cough got worse. I started getting fatigued again. I went to the ER on February 28th. They told me they saw some small infiltrations and some other stuff in my lung and felt like I was brewing a pneumonia. Ooh. So I had to take the prednisone and the antibiotics. And this is why I'm saying every step along the way, it's like I've just seen God intervene before I got just so bad where I would have had to have gone to the hospital. And by God's grace, I did not end up in the hospital or in oxygen. And this could have gone a whole different way. So I shared with somebody yesterday, a good friend of mine from college. He lives in Texas, and we were talking, and I said, bruh, was I just lucky and blessed, or did the Lord spare me? If the Lord spared me, then he spared me for a purpose. And I just want you to pray with me that I stay connected with God about what is that purpose. So I would ask you all to continue to pray with me in that too. Sometimes I think we take so much for granted and we've missed the things that God is trying to accomplish and do in our lives. And I don't want to continue to live my life in that way. So before I get all emotional there, I'm going to let you go on and take over your talk, bruh.
You saying a word right now, so there's no way I'm going to put a pause on that. You're sharing some really powerful stuff now, and I'm really glad that you are feeling better and you turned the corner. Your vulnerable testimony, I think, speaks volumes about not only the importance of faith and your faith, but also how serious that we all have to take this. And so I appreciate you being so open to share, your journey and your experience with all of us. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started real quick. Just a quick word of prayer, and then we'll jump right into it. And hopefully, you guys have a bunch of questions. There are a number of things that have gone on in the interim since we spoke last. So bow your heads. Most kind and gracious Heavenly Divine Father, we ask in a special way for us to recognize all which we take for granted, so that we may just take a moment to be grateful. Be grateful for each one of us being here, being able to be upright and share, support, and listen to each other. We thank you for the richness of the seasons, and for the sunshine that you've given us today, and for the morsels of food and the energy that it provides for each one of us, and just to have a sound mind, to know where we are, and to recognize the blessings and happiness that you have for us. We ask now that you be with each one, each heart and each ear that is here with us over the next several minutes, so that we can take in what is prepared and what will be shared with each other. Help it to edify us and our choices and our understanding and our living. But most importantly, may it help us to remember that we serve a master that is almighty and powerful, that all we must and need to is trust in you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me see if that works, David. And have just a few things I want to share with you all, and then we'll get into some questions. Let's see. Okay, so we've been doing this quite a while, and as usual, our conversations center around some trends and items in the news, and then give us some opportunities to ask questions and share with each other. We've not learned a lot more about the natural history of COVID-19. There still is what we believe was about 50% of people who are actually infected are infected by people who are asymptomatic. So of people who present to the hospitals or who become symptomatic, at least 1 out of every 2 people got it from someone who had no symptoms. So we know that this asymptomatic phase, which is here, this asymptomatic phase, before symptoms actually even begin, is a really important phase in the transmission. And I've told you all this before, but I think it's really important to remember to assume that still, even though things are better, that anyone and everyone might very well have the virus. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but remember that within the next few weeks, the most dominant virus in California and the United States will be a new strain, the one they call B.1.1.7 from the United Kingdom. And that's actually even more infectious than the dominant variant that we had during the first year. So just assume that you have risk for asymptomatic spreading and make sure that you protect yourselves. And again, as I reminded you all from last time, there is now really good data that double masking, so a surgical mask of some sort and then a cloth mask on top of that, is better than a single mask by itself, okay? And it's still spread, as we've talked about before, but again, particularly if you're in an enclosed area for prolonged periods of time, you can also think about how you might protect your eyes. And so, again, covering your mouth and air passages, as well as your eyes, are really important, as well as continued hand hygiene. So, in January, remember, this is how the US map looked when we were sort of just coming out of another real surge. And that current map this week looks like that, right? That's a really different map in terms of colors. And again, we're looking at outbreaks. The dark, deep red, almost sort of magenta, where we were before, is almost not absent at all in the United States, except for small parts of New York. So again, I think this is very, very helpful in knowing how things have changed just in the last 6 weeks or so. Dramatic changes. And my only commentary about that is that there is some discussion that after we've had this initial very widespread outbreak around the United States, that it's possible that this virus may be taking on a seasonal type of variation, and that we'll see just with some time. But clearly, you can see that California, which was actually leading the way 6 weeks ago, right, in terms of severity of outbreaks, is now one of the slowest areas of growth and spread in the country. Okay. Those numbers, when we look at metropolitan areas, now my baby girl, my daughter's in New York here, and so you can see that New York is higher than any other metro area, with a sort of positivity rate of 7%, if you will. And again, just daily new cases are around 39, but this number of 39 is nothing compared to where we were again in January. We were at 100 or 150 to 200, depending on where you were in the state of California. So things are now, as you can see, much lower at just 8 new cases per 100,000. That's a very, very, very low rate, and a positivity rate of 2.4%. Now, this is much lower because we had positivity rates at one point, meaning of everyone coming to the ER, everyone getting tested, we had 1 in 4, as high as 1 in 3 people who were tested became positive. Now that number is about 1 in 40. So that's actually quite good news. We still have high numbers of people getting tested, but the rate of community spread is actually quite low now. And the number of individuals that have actually been vaccinated in LA County, of the 10 million, we are close to 2 million. Okay, so just about 20%. And again, that's pretty important. And when it looks like, when we're talking about progress, right? So just over 2 million. And so we're actually doing quite well. Right here in Long Beach, there are long lines at the convention center of individuals waiting to get vaccinated. Those numbers, again, looked at graphically with regard to cases. You can see we're here now, and those numbers are actually lower finally than they were even during our July surge earlier last year, and are getting close to where they were last year in the springtime, which is actually quite nice. There's always a lag with cases and deaths, and so you'll see that when you look at deaths, we still have higher numbers of deaths, because deaths and hospitalizations or complications lag behind actually getting a new infection. So the number of new deaths are actually still quite significant, but they're actually on the way down as well. Okay, as well as ICU hospitalizations. Last time I talked to you all, I had in my hospital alone some 170 patients with COVID. Now I have total in the hospital 27 patients today. So things are dramatically different. Okay. If I look at all of LA County, at least the county hospitals, today in the hospital, in all of the county hospitals, which are 4 hospitals, there are a total of 70 patients total. We had over 1,000, okay, just 6-7 weeks ago. right? So hospitals are getting back to sort of normal business with regard to ambulatory care, surgery, regular sort of business, people coming to the emergency room for regular sort of reasons, if you will. And there's some semblance of normality in the healthcare system. And so these projections that were out there before that predicted that things would go down, it turns out that the computer models and all that were actually good. And a lot of that was because the behavior of people improved significantly. Now, this is important because when we look at, even though we're overall moderate, and we're looking at sort of a 2.3% positivity rate, and therefore our overall risk is sort of moderate. When we look at LA County, you all know that people have begun opening things up quite a bit, right? You know, the indoor businesses at reduced capacity has opened up. Restaurants, indoor restaurants have opened up a reduced capacity. Outdoor dining is obviously thriving. They're opening up movie theaters with reduced capacity, and a variety of businesses, which is sort of a good thing overall. But as you all may or may not remember, last week the CDC came out with a recommendation. I don't know if anyone remembers what was publicized, and the CDC recommendation basically said, hey, if a group of people have all been vaccinated, you can get together without a mask, okay? And that's not quite what it said, but that's how it was read and passed on. And what that has done is that has actually made people feel like, since our rate of infection is so low, and people are getting vaccinated, that, hey, I don't need to wear a mask. And so in my area, as I drive down the street or walk down the street or ride my bike, I see so many people, and I know they're not all vaccinated, not wearing masks anymore at all, okay? And I get it. People actually have caution fatigue and feel like they just want to breathe. But this should be taken with some serious grain of salt, because we know that B117 is right around the corner to be the most dominant strain, not only in California, but in the US. And it's 55 to 60% more infectious than the prior strain. And so the most important reason to think about this is to look at world data. Now, when we look at world data, the numbers here on the side, which are actually sort of rolling trends of new cases, are not controlled. They're not controlled for the total number of population. So you just have to just take that with a grain of salt. But what I want you to do is look at the colors here. And if you look at this color scheme here on the upper right, light orange all the way to dark red, the light orange are actually fewer cases, okay? And to the right with the dark red are more cases, right? And so what you can see, and this is sort of a timeline going from January to March, so almost a 6-week, 2-month period. And what you can see here is that there are countries which are sort of ahead of our curve. What do I mean? So if you look at United States is just dark, right? Dark, 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 going all the way across. And we actually are getting better in the US. So over the next 6 weeks, you're going to see a graph like this where our colors are going to turn lighter orange, okay? Now, if I compare that to United Kingdom here, which actually was sort of lighter orange here, and then you can see here, they actually are starting to get darker orange. Well, the projected cases in United Kingdom, as well as in Germany, both Germany and the UK, is that they're beginning to see day-to-day rises that are almost doubling every 2 to 3 days. Germany is about to go back into a lockdown, and the United Kingdom will soon follow. Why is this happening? Because B117 is now and has already become the dominant strain, and they can't keep up with that. And at the same time, as B117 was spreading through the community, they opened everything up, okay? So in Germany, which is a really good case study, Germany opened everything up, even though B117 was becoming more prevalent. Now Germany, the health minister this week announced that they may very well lock Germany down by the end of the week because the number of cases in the hospitals are overflowing with COVID cases again. And just 6 weeks ago, the hospitals were relatively empty of COVID cases. So I'm saying all that to say that here are two case studies of European countries which are sort of ahead of us with regard to B117. And just looking at what's happening in those countries is a sort of a warning signal to what could happen in the US, even California, if we're not careful, if we're too lax. So it's unlikely that Governor Newsom or many of these governors are going to shut anything down. We're just opening things back up again. But what I want to share with you as a key message is I don't want you all as individuals and the people that you care about and your loved ones to fall for the okie doke, if you will. You still should remain vigilant. I know you need to go out and get outside. I want you all to socialize, but socialize in a safe way, in a distant way with masks. Please remain vigilant and careful because we are seeing and we will see that the new dominant strain B117 by end of March, beginning of April, will be the most dominant strain and will spread much more rapidly in the community to opportunistic individuals. So please, please, please be vigilant. And there obviously are new strains which are not as prevalent and are behind the B117 United Kingdom strain, which will over time, again, if we lax in our vigilant sort of safety practices, will go up and increase. And some of the other strains are not just more infectious, but they're more virulent or more deadly with regard to complications. So good news that California is looking really good with these sort of really nice sort of sunshiny numbers here. But as they say, don't let the smooth taste fool you. Be vigilant, be careful, and know, just like in other countries, sometimes the reprieve and the calm and the lower incidence of community spread really is just the sort of delay that it oftentimes takes for a virus to spread to the community. This is what happened in the US, remember, right? We went from one case to hundreds of thousands of new cases to millions of cases over a really short period of time because there were vulnerable individuals, right? Vulnerable individuals who were susceptible to infection. Again, we only have 20% of individuals who are vaccinated. The vaccine itself does not prevent infection. It may reduce the risk of spread to some degree, but we still have lots of people who are yet to be vaccinated and lots of people who have not been infected yet. Okay? Any questions about that part?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
Okay, you said that earlier. Oh, I'm echoing.
I did not hear you.
You said that earlier. Hold on. Bad.
I hear earlier, then it shuts out.
Yeah, he's echoing.
Let somebody else go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So what? Daryl, this is Keith.
Hey, Keith.
I came in a little late. You two
Echoing.
just looking at the US chart. New York was so much darker than the rest of the country. I don't know if you said something about that already.
Yeah, so just remember where New York started. So if we go back to this, right? This was where they were in January. So New York started at the darkest. I mean, California was dark too, but the actual numbers were worse in certain parts of New York. So while New York is slow to improve, a lot of the slow to improvement in New York has to do with congregate housing, right? So housing density and on top of that, the number of people in housing. So in Los Angeles, for example, we have housing density issues with regard to number of people per household, but we don't have the number of housing densities with regard to units together, right? New York has both, right? And so they're slower to improve. Now, separate from that sort of epidemiologic observation, New York has also had some recent outbreaks. If some of you have been following the news, or if you look at some of the data, there are some individual counties within New York which have had some outbreaks. And so New York is also getting more European traffic, right? From airline travel. And you have to remember, this is just so weird. Like there are European countries which won't let us in, but the U.S. is letting them in. Okay. Yeah, that's a different phenomena. So we still have new cases coming into the U.S., particularly on the eastern seaboard from Europe and South America.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So if you just compare this to this, right? It's a brighter red. It's not the darkest red, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's improving. It's just lagging compared to the others. That's all.
Thanks.
Okay. Let me just say a couple of words about vaccine, just to remind folk. Again, 4 different sort of vaccine methods, right? Viral vector, which is the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, Moderna and Pfizer, the mRNAs. And then you have Sputnik, which is in Russia. So there are 3 that are currently approved in the US, right? Pfizer, Moderna, which are mRNAs, and then most recently J&J, which is actually a single shot viral vector. AstraZeneca has been pulled and held in a lot of places around the world where it was already approved, mostly because of this risk of blood clots that have been seen, both venous blood clots as well as stroke and heart attack. The numbers of blood clots that occur in the about 7 million people who've received AstraZeneca worldwide, particularly in the European Union, turns out to have a prevalence or a number very similar to the general population. But because it's occurred in the context of vaccine administration, people are just investigating that first. But we currently in the US have only 3 approved: Pfizer, Moderna, which we talked about before, and J&J. The public, most recent update on the public general public is actually late April or May. They've already reduced the recommendations for age down to 18 for those who have comorbidities. So many people, if you sign up, you can actually go to a public site. You can go to CVS, you can go anywhere. And when you sign up, you actually fill out a form and you actually are supposed to document and qualify based on age or comorbidity. If you don't check anything that says age or comorbidity appropriate, then you won't get the vaccine. So there are tons of people who are signing up online or in person who are saying they have hypertension or they have diabetes or whatever, and they're getting the vaccine because they've now sort of quote unquote opened up the floodgates, even though they haven't truly opened up the floodgates to the general public. If you've got comorbidities, many sites are allowing individuals who are adults, age 18 above with a comorbidity, to be vaccinated. I'm curious for the group on this call, who has or hasn't, well, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. Is there anyone who actually tried to get vaccinated who has been refused or turned down?
No, but it was
news.
news. Oh, it's second. Sorry, bed closed. There was in the news women that
I lost it. It was in the news that what?
Daryl, it seems as if everybody's echoing.
echoing.
Well, let's just have everyone mute themselves except for the person talking. And after you talk, then unmute yourself. Okay, so everyone mute themselves. Okay, whoever is talking, go ahead.
Well, I'll go in and talk. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can't. I don't hear an echo either. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So, I just want to mention, you mentioned earlier about the people who have vaccination to get together.
He's echoing.
Okay.
Okay, what you could do is Daryl. Why does I muted your shared sound? So I think that's what happened. I think that's what happened. That your computer is echoing.
Okay, let me do this real quick here. I am going to. Okay, are we good now?
I'm good.
Better.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, good. So go ahead.
Okay, so you're saying that about people who have been vaccinated could get together without masking, but you said that's not actually what was said. What was actually said? Because
okay,
I'm getting that all the time.
So let's talk a little bit about this. This is super important. So let me draw everyone's attention to a year ago, right, when everything started, and they were talking about personal protective equipment, wearing masks. Does anyone remember when actually people with a very straight face said, you know, you don't even need to wear a mask? Do people remember that in the very beginning?
Yep.
Yes,
I remember.
Now, do you know why they said that? Do you think it was because they didn't know, or because they were making a calculated decision?
I thought it was because they didn't want to rush on the mask.
That's correct. So there was a shortage of masks, and there were not enough masks even for healthcare providers taking care of patients who were sick in hospitals, particularly in New York, right? And so people were wearing bandanas. There were people who had no proper protection. And because there was such a shortage, in order to prevent people from buying up a bunch of it, profiting off of it, or hoarding, they made a decision to make an announcement. Now, the reason why I go back to that is because it's so important when decisions are made, when guidelines are actually provided, when they're updated, to always consider, are there other issues or bigger issues kind of going on? The CDC is not a private for-profit agency. The CDC is an agency heavily influenced, right? It's cdc.gov. It is a political, or I should say a governmental agency, okay? It's a governmental agency, which is heavily influenced by whoever is in office, right or wrongly. That's a governmental agency for you. So there nationally is a real cry out, right, for caution fatigue. There's a real cry for economics. There's a real cry for people just trying to sniff a little bit of normalcy, okay? So you have behavioral health, which is super important. You have economic health and well-being, which is, really, really, really important, both of which are real drivers, along with the political machine that actually needs to be seen as making some dent in our way of life, okay? So what the CDC did is actually they put in writing what people were almost already doing. So what are you doing, Derek? So Derek goes home. Do you wear a mask at home? Well, maybe I shouldn't ask you, Derek. Let me ask somebody else. I'm just teasing Derek. So, like you come home from work, if you go to work or wherever, and you come home to a household of 3, and no one has a mask on your household. I come home. I don't have a mask on my household. Everyone already is going to their own households and not wearing a mask unless someone has a high-risk exposure and needs to be quarantined, okay? This is already the case. before vaccination. Okay, so if you ask what the intention, read the fine print of the CDC's new guidance was, it was for households that have been vaccinated, that they can actually just live normally, socially, in their bubble without a mask. Well, we were already doing that, okay? It should be noted that the guidance was not intended for businesses. It was not intended for healthcare, very specifically, not intended for any of those, and not intended for people who are mixing in multiple sort of what I would describe as multiple cross bubble settings. So let's just say everyone in this group was vaccinated, okay? And we represent 8 different or 9 or 10 different households, okay? And every one of you all is vaccinated, but we all have our comings and goings. Our bubbles are all over the place, okay? When we get together, we should all wear a mask. Even though we've all been vaccinated, even though we've all been vaccinated, because our bubbles are all over the place, okay? And compliance and, is Vina really wearing her mask? Whatever it is, right? And remember, the vaccine does not prevent you from getting infected. And we're not just trying to prevent ourselves from being infected. We're also trying to prevent ourselves from transmitting something in the context of a new variant, which is even more infectious. So the CDC was not giving permission for a bunch of mixed households to just start hanging out together who happen to be all vaccinated without masks and just willy-nilly. Absolutely not, okay? So if you really look at what they were doing, they actually just put in writing what people were already doing, number one, which is households were already unmasked. And now they're just saying, if you're all vaccinated, you can feel really comfortable about it. And in really low risk situations, a low risk situation might be, I really trust someone else's bubble. They have a really tight bubble, and I have a tight bubble. And we're gonna go and we're gonna mix, and we're gonna be in an open space household and not wear a mask for a short period of time, maybe something like that. But it's not saying, hey, V, you got vaccinated, I got vaccinated, let's go party. Okay, come on over. We're going to play Scrabble for the next 5 hours. It's not saying that at all. So I hope I've made that clear. There's no question that vaccines will lower the risk of transmission by some 60% or more. But 60 or 70% is not 5% or 0, right? So with something that's more infectious, reducing the rate of transmission by 50 or 60% because you're vaccinated does not reduce the rate of transmission substantially enough for me where I want your virus, okay? Or do I want your virus to carry asymptomatically to somebody else, okay? I hope that is crystal clear, okay? Questions about that? Everyone's so quiet.
You said that double masking. So a lot of people are either single masking or bandanaing, which in my estimation is not very effective at all.
It's better than nothing.
Okay. Whatever.
Yeah. It's better than nothing.
Okay. But with the new strain, is that bandana even more of a threat, or is the new strain not as powerful in terms of getting through masks and things like that as the previous strain? Is it we know it's more infectious, but in what sense?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let me clarify one thing real quick about the double masking. So double masking versus the study was done where they took a cloth mask and a surgical mask together versus one or the other versus neither, okay? And one or the other was better than nothing, right? But it reduced the risk, depending on what type and how it was fit properly, et cetera, by 70, 80%. right? Versus the double mask was like 98%. It was like phenomenal, right? And a lot of that has to do with mask fitting. That's what that has to do with, right? It's all about how well your generic surgical mask or whatever you're wearing fits your face. That's really what that's all about. And when people have actually done studies, there are small, medium, and large size masks. Most hospitals just actually have or small, regular, and large size masks. Most people just distribute regular size masks. All right. So there are a lot of different sizes, shapes of faces, and no one's testing which is the right size surgical mask.
And
for
speak
you.
to shields too, because I see a lot of shields.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. But what the cloth mask does, because it conforms to your face so much easier, is when you wear the surgical mask and then you put the cloth mask on top, because the cloth mask is so conforming, right? It now provides a much better seal. Now, with regard to something being more infectious or not, it's really not so much that what you're wearing, if wearing properly, is less useful or less protective. It's not that. If worn properly, the stuff works, right? Period. Like, period. Because the mode of transmission is the same, right? The mode of transmission is still mostly air droplet more than air. It's not like pure aerosol like measles. And so a double mask, the assumption is, most people believe that if you wore a double mask, it would, whether you're talking about the new strain or the old strain, it would give you the same protection. What the infectivity means is, given a similar exposure, what's the chance that you will actually walk away with the disease, right? So given the same exposure, whatever that generic exposure is, and that could be you coming over to my house to eat, right? And sitting across the table in a room, there was, say, a 75% chance, if you will, right? Or that's too high. Let's say a 25% chance of you getting it if you sat there across the table from me for 4 hours. I'm just making up a number just for comparison. And with the new strain, the B117, which is more infectious, instead of being 25%, it'll be closer to 40 or 42%, right? It'll be a higher risk of transmission. But whatever methods to protect yourself, if used properly, will protect you. So that's why I'm trying to underscore that it's so important that during this lull, where everything's great, the community infection rate is way down, B117, meanwhile, is just sort of making its way, right? That people remain vigilant when they are in public or they're around other people. Double mask, wear your mask. Remember the 3 Ds, right? Don't be right up on anybody for any length of time, right? And any enclosed space, right? Duration, density, right? And distance. Those things matter for all strains, right? So if you can take care of the 3 Ds and you can double mask, it's super important. The shields become important more for direct face-to-face interactions or sort of face confrontation for prolonged periods of time. Prolonged periods of time being, 10 to 15 minutes or more, right? So if I'm in an enclosed space with not a great circulation, probably a face mask is, not a bad thing. If I'm patient-facing or client-facing, one after the other, like at Trader Joe's, having some barrier between you and the clients, the shopper, is super important, right? On a casual basis, going in and out, probably not a big deal because it's just such a short period of time. But if you're going to be stagnant or face-to-face or confronting anybody in particularly a non-high ventilated area, so indoors, strongly suggest that you again protect your eyes as well. And that shouldn't be too many circumstances that are like that. That should not be that common of a circumstance. Hope I answered your question.
My question,
very well. Thank you.
Arrington, you said the shield in front, face to face, but it doesn't go all the way up to the roof. So what about those droplets that come over the ceiling that it's just maybe 4 feet in front of you?
Yeah, that's important. But remember, I don't want to get too crude. Remember that this is about duration and density, right? So total exposure. So this is not like the super virus where one virus gets you, then it multiplies and it's over, right? Like flesh-eating bacteria, where just the one bacteria get there, then it just doubles every 20 minutes. Before you know it, your arm's eaten off. This is not like that. Our bodies and natural immunity can actually handle small amounts of this stuff quite well. It's actually when you get a certain threshold of it that it becomes very challenging. So when you think about what you actually have to absorb, right? It has to absorb, take hold, particularly in your nasopharyngeal area in your lungs, for it to get access to your cells. It's actually a little bit of it. It's not like a little small amount. So I hear what you're saying. I would say unless someone is right there and they're just talking and just talking into the visor, the crack of the visor, there's just not enough that's going to be significant. Most of the masks have like a little sort of foam padding around to take care of the top anyway. And unless you have really lots of updraft, for example, remember gravity's taking care of this virus quite nicely, and it's falling to ground, quickly. So having a shield works actually quite well. And I would say, unless you have a job where you have to be in front of somebody for prolonged periods of time, wearing a mask is probably unnecessary. But if you actually have prolonged client-facing interactions, you should wear a mask for sure. And remember, this is all sort of now double and triple sort of security, right? Because in any situation like that, what should I see if I were walking by? I should see both individuals masked, your mask, the client's mask. And there's also a particle separation of either plastic, right? Or someone has a shield on. So if both people have masks on, in the study that was done, where they actually looked at, 2 versus 1 versus no mask, they also compared that in a situation where the individual was masked and the individual wasn't masked, right? The people emitting it. And if that person's masked and that person's double masked, you have a 0 chance of getting anything, right? So what you're really talking about, where you have to really be thinking about, well, I need to wear a visor too, is if you are in a client-facing environment where your clients weren't wearing a mask. And as you know, in many businesses, they're like, no mask, no service, right? And I would stand by that pretty firmly in almost any business I can think of. No mask, no service, as simple as that, right? So I wouldn't worry as much about, oh, I have to have a shield on when people are wearing their mask, particularly if you're having a client facing interaction. It's when that client is either non-compliant, not wearing their mask correctly, et cetera, that you really just want to add that extra of having a face shield on. All right, good. Yeah, great question. Any other questions about that piece? So one of the things that's come up has been this conversation around, well, how do you compare these three? Now we have 3 vaccines, these 3 vaccines. And some of you are yet to be vaccinated, and as time goes on, right, they are sort of having different stock levels of one versus the other. So in the County of Los Angeles for Department of Health Services, right, our first vaccine that we had was Pfizer. And then they gave us Moderna. And now our Pfizer vaccine stockpile is going down. Moderna is still okay. And our J&J is going up, okay? The official recommendation is all vaccines work. They may not work equally the same, but I wouldn't actually avoid getting a vaccine because I'm waiting for this other vaccine. Having said that, they are different vaccines. The mRNA vaccines work a little differently. The side effect profile is a little bit different. They are these mRNA virus, the vaccines that sort of work as a construction worker, as I said, who comes to your house, they do their work, and then they leave after they've, remodeled the bathroom or what have you. The viral vector is the vaccine material being inserted via a live virus, in this case, adenovirus, which is a common virus that we all get, and it gets injected or inserted into your cells and genetic material to, again, tell your cells to make the protein so your body recognizes it again. It is one shot versus the two shots of the Pfizer and the Moderna, and its effectiveness, at least from a data standpoint of view, seems to be a little less in probably the 60 to 70% range compared to the 95% range after you get two shots with the other. Side effect profile overall seems to be about the same. There may be a little bit more viral syndrome-ish frequency with fever and all that with the one shot, but it's sort of, again, short-lived as well. Otherwise, no one has really seen or complained of any major differences or sort of weird side effects of the vaccine as of yet. My preference has been, I tell people, as long as they've got Pfizer and Moderna, if you got access to that, get it. Because you'll be in the 90 to 95% protection or more, number one. Side effect profile is a little bit more favorable overall by the numbers. And there's probably a little bit more data experience with it, even with regard to B117, with regard to its effectiveness with the variant, meaning that it may be a little bit more effective against the B117 variant than the J&J. Okay, so that's the quick and dirty of the three vaccines that we have now. I'm happy to talk more detail. There's a lot more detailed information, but I have no stock in any of the biotech companies. But if I had all three sitting in front of me and my kids are yet to be vaccinated, I'd probably be trying to get an mRNA vaccine for them. In terms of timelines, they're doing studies right now looking at the younger population. As you all know, that's not approved for under 16. And there are data beginning to be generated for kids all the way down to 2 years of age. And J&J is actually doing some studies with regard to infants at least 6 months of age and older. So that data will be coming out in the coming months. But as of now, you need to be at least 16 years of age or older. Okay.
Question,
okay.
Dr. Harrington.
Yep.
I got the second Pfizer and I don't have any symptom. So
yep.
Did I get the right one? That's all I'm saying.
Well, I also got Pfizer, and my second dose, I had just a sore arm. That's really it. Otherwise, I felt okay. Maybe a slight sort of headache-ish sort of thing. Remember, for Pfizer anyway, it may be up to like 24% of people or so who might have fever, headaches, and muscle aches and joint aches. So you're one of the 76% who didn't, right? So the majority of people won't have anything, although there's 1 in 4 or so who will. So you'll hear stories of people who had it. Moderna may be slightly higher, about 30%, where 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 people who have it will say, man, I felt like I got beat up, right? But the majority of people, almost 2/3 to 3/4 of people, won't have any symptoms, okay? Or I should say drastic symptoms, right? They might still have sore arm or a little sort of malaise, but they won't have any drastic symptoms. So that's common. You're in the majority group. And it doesn't mean that the vaccine was less effective for you at all.
Yeah, what do I have now is like a kind of runny nose, not like a runny nose if you have like the flu, but just this constant, wet nose. I'm like, is that the after effect?
It could be. It could be. It also could be, springtime. But it could be. We know that there are a variety. If that is the case, it should be short-lived. If it's ongoing, it's not from the vaccine. Most of the vaccine syndromes are less than 72 hours. Most of them are 48 hours or less. But anything that lasts more than 3 days is probably not vaccine related. Okay, the vaccine syndromes are very short-lived. Okay, so if you're having a running, go ahead.
Do I have to stay away from somebody that got vaccinated and is experiencing those things?
Yeah, that's a great question, Derek. The simple answer is no. So someone who's got vaccinated doesn't, remember, they don't become immune or develop immunity for probably 2 weeks afterwards. And if you are getting a 2-dose vaccine, they're only 50% protective or so right after the first dose. After the second dose, you go to the 95% range. So they are still at risk of getting the infection, but you're not getting the infection from the vaccine. So I would say that anyone who's got any symptoms, okay, until proven otherwise, they're infected, right? That's the way I would look at them, right? Even if they're vaccinated, okay? So I'm vaccinated. If I started actually coughing and all this other stuff, chances that I have it is low, but would that give me full range just to go and do whatever? Absolutely not. I should actually go through the same protocol to be sure that I did not get infected, right? That I'm not going to transmit to someone else. So that may mean, depending on where you are, where you work, there are some rapid test protocols that you could take. There are some quarantining, conservative protocols that you can take. Just because you're vaccinated doesn't mean that you can't get it or become symptomatic. It means that you'll be a lot less likely, 95% less likely, to have a severe reaction or complication, to be hospitalized or die. That's what the vaccine is doing for you. And it probably does reduce your risk of transmission or getting it by 50%, okay, or more. But it doesn't prevent you, in theory, from getting it. So if I get vaccinated today and tomorrow I'm coughing and I'm febrile, it may be influenza. It may be something completely different, but I should act like it's potentially COVID. And I should take the necessary steps and protocols to be sure that I don't have an active infection. Or I could just quarantine for 10 days, right? Because I'm working actively around other people, I would actually engage in a rapid testing protocol to be sure.
Next question. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. This is going to be my last question. Do you know
No, it's okay.
if there's any study or they're following people who have been vaccinated to see how long the antibodies remain in them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's hard because you can have immunity without necessarily testing positive for antibodies, right? So antibodies are just an indirect way of testing your immunity or your protection. Right now, Dr. Fauci has interpreted, and others have interpreted, the studies of and outcomes of the 30,000 plus people in each of the trials, that probably somewhere on the short end of 6 months, on the long end, probably around a year or 12 months of protection. If you guys watched Dr. Fauci the other day talk a little bit about, he believes that the companies will likely come up with a booster, right? And the booster will be another vaccine that has been altered so that it actually is more able to cover common proteins, what we call common antigens, that cover the mutants, okay? So that's probably 6 months to a year or more down the line. But what that will mean is that we have, I talked about, like, 3 major variants, right? The UK variant, the South African variant, and the Brazilian variant. There's another one that's emerging as well through Europe. Well, let's just talk about those 3. Even though those 3 variants occur, and why do they occur, by the way? Why do variants occur? Well, they occur for a number of reasons. The 2 biggest reasons are natural selection, like everyone's trying to survive. And when one is being killed and not surviving because of medications, the host isn't surviving, or vaccines or whatever, the virus says, let's smarten up. Let's change the game a little bit so that we can survive. The other reason why mutants occur is just because of what naturally happens in a rapidly replicating or dividing organism. So just a little cancer 101. The most common reason why people get cancer is inflammation gone bad. Okay, when you have an inflammatory process, an owie, right? Our bodies go like, well, let's heal it, and we heal by causing inflammation to create a scar and do all this other stuff. And 99,999 times, right? It goes perfectly. But that one time that doesn't go perfectly, the body goes like, I don't know when to stop repairing. I just keep on repairing. And it actually has kind of cancerous or malignant type behavior. In other words, it's not being inhibited by the natural sort of chemicals and messengers at the cellular level. So it just keeps on growing, and then it takes over. That's what happens with cancer, and that's just a repair defect. The best example I love to give with that is like a copy machine, Xerox machine. I put a piece of paper on the top of the copier, and I say, I want 1,000 copies. How many of you guys have done that with 100 or whatever? And then after it gets to whatever number, which were perfect copies, there's a paper jam, right? And then you got to clear the path. Well, everything in the copy machine was working perfectly, and you were getting exactly what it was designed to do. And then because a paper was a little tweaked, or the machine got a little off kilter just by 1% you get a paper jam. Well, that's what happens in the repair process. Even though most times everything works perfectly, sometimes when something's happening a lot, very frequently, like when cells divide and replicate over and over and over again, you can get a mutation, a sort of mistake. And that's called a point mutation. It's actually very, very, very common in the natural selection of the world, right? It happens in bugs, it happens in humans, it happens in fruit, it happens in any living tissue. You could get mutations, right? So that's sort of going to be part of the course. And what will happen is that when you look at mutations that occur, there are common proteins across the mutations that if we're smart enough, we can develop vaccines which will cover all of it, right? And so this booster that Dr. Fauci and others have talked about recently is aimed at actually trying to cover some common characteristics that cover all of the major variants that will sort of help protect you, right? And more for that, people talk about that in the next 3 to 6 months. Okay.
I just want to add some more information about the studies that are going on since I'm part of one. They did
Sure.
They did a blood test before I took the first vaccine. They did a blood test before I took the second vaccine. Then they did another blood test 2 weeks after the second vaccine. Then another one 1 month after the second vaccine. And now they will take one every 3 months. Also, they ask you that if you have any COVID-like symptoms to call them immediately. They also send a weekly survey with the same question if you had any COVID-like symptoms for the past week, let them know. And also they said, they gave me a 24-hour number to call, that if I'm hospitalized for any reason whatsoever to call, because even though I may not relate it to the vaccine, they may think it may be related to the vaccine, like what talk earlier about the blood clots. I would not think that's COVID related, the vaccine related, but they want to know for any reason whatsoever. And it's for 2 years, they'll be following up for 2 years. So they're collecting quite a bit of information. Not only do they do the online survey, they do call in person once a week, because people being what people are, they don't always, they just say yes or no to the survey, but when you talk to a person, you may give a different answer.
Well, David, I appreciate you sharing that, because that as a participant in the study, as someone who's been the investigator, doing studies like that, it's, I think, important for people to hear that actually there's quite a bit of detail, like a lot of vigilance that goes into trying to gather the right information. Like, people aren't just making this stuff up. I spent today with my staff about an hour, not trying to beat them into, you got to get the vaccine, but trying to listen to their concerns about their vaccine hesitancy. And both of them had concerns about the science. They thought that people just sort of started working on this last year, and that they didn't do a lot of testing. They weren't collecting all the right information. And I think that people are right to be distrustful and fearful. So I appreciate, David, you sharing that, because I think it just adds to the idea that there really are some thoughtful, smart people who are being responsible, who are trying to get as much information and detailed information as possible. And they're actually kind of going overboard. Most times you only need to do safety studies for 1 year for most drugs. The idea that they're following you for 2 years is overkill in a good way, because there's, again, for vaccine research, there's so much concern that there are long-term, complications, et cetera. So thank you for sharing that. That's really so important.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, on our job, they already announced that they will be online for the summer. And by April 1st, they'll make a decision for the fall. Yeah. Would there be enough information by April 1st with this current low where it will continue trending down for them to make a decision for the fall? Yeah, I think so. It's a good question about everybody's waiting, right? Like everyone in academics, like I was on a call last week where we were trying to talk about, are we going to go back to some in-person instruction with reduced capacity? What can we do? Can people have graduation? All this stuff. Isabella's graduating in May. Hallelujah. And she's graduating and we can't attend, right? So everyone is trying to figure out how they're going to handle infection prevention control practices. And the smart people, right, are really waiting on what's going to happen with B1117, the UK variant. As it becomes the dominant strain in California, when it becomes the dominant strain, are we going to see another surge? So probably by the beginning of April, we'll begin to see some signs. And if we don't see any signs of increase in the next few weeks, people will make tentative plans. Again, the operative word is tentative plans to allow for in-person instruction. The California Department of Public Health still has to make their update of their new guidance, which they have not yet, related to schools. So we're waiting on that. And then the Departments of Public Health for the counties will take that information, right, and translate it to the county. So everyone's waiting to see what happens. And it's really this, by the time we talk again, we should have answers. Like by the time we talk in April, there should be enough data epidemiologically to know whether or not we're moving in a direction where we're going to have a lull for a good period of time. Now, having said that, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, I think most of you all may have heard me say in passing that there is a lot of conversation about this virus now taking on a seasonal variation, type of behavior. And if that's the case, then we're in for a doozy in the winter, right? So we could go on into classes in the fall and things be really quite nice with very few infections in the community, et cetera. But like influenza, but this is more infectious than influenza, when it gets cold, people actually stop being outside as much, et cetera. Boom, this now respiratory-like illness really just sort of blows up. So that is to be seen. People are just talking about some of these sort of theoretical models, but in the short run, by the beginning of April, probably the first couple of weeks of April by tax day, we should have a plan or an idea about school, in-person classes, et cetera, and capacity of those classes for the fall.
So Dr. This is not going away anytime soon, and there are more strains coming, more likely than not, and we're in this for the long haul.
Yeah, so good question, observation, depressive thought potentially or not, right? So let's look at different scenarios. Like polio does not exist, basically, right? Except for in certain parts of the world, there's polio and measles. Why? Because everyone has gotten vaccinated, right? And we catch people early on. We have such herd immunity in the community that the virus cannot thrive. Even when there's a case every now and then, it's got nowhere to go, right? The question you raise is sort of related to this in a way. It's like we're at a vaccine rate of 20%, and we basically are in a race against time, right? If we had enough vaccine produced and we had distribution mechanisms which were really efficient, and I had a crystal ball, then we could say, or magic wand, say, I'm going to make sure that everyone in the US who's eligible for vaccination is vaccinated within the next 30 days, period. Then we would not be in this for the long haul. Then we would basically eradicate this. Okay. The challenge with that ask is nearly impossible. Why? Because we're talking about a global distribution, right? We have 7 billion people, 7 billion people, right? We don't even have worldwide. Like, let's just worldwide, 7 billion people. They're not even 200 million doses.
Yeah.
Okay. You see how far away we are from this, right? So what that means is that you're going to have pockets. Either you have to have everyone get infected, which still there's a large proportion of the population that still haven't been infected. Everyone has to get infected, or everyone has to be vaccinated. And either one of those has to happen in a really short period of time for it to sort of stop the virus in its tracks. If it happens in too slow a period of time, then what happens is the virus just kind of continues to meander its way, and it kind of hangs out in little pockets here or there, waiting to raise its ugly head again. And the people aren't being vaccinated fast enough for a mutation to change our behavior. What do I mean? So one of the things I didn't go over is like news. It's off the front page today in New York Times, okay? New virus in France, new variant in France, right? That cannot be detected by PCR. What? Right? So the test that we have been reliably using to say you have it or you don't have it doesn't work in a new strain detected in France. Okay? So I'm just giving you an example, right? A new strain, right? The strain that's in Brazil, we know doesn't really respond to the vaccine nearly as well as the UK strain. So over time, as the time gets more and more protracted, the virus starts doing and continues to do funky things that actually don't allow us to be as smart, right? And so that's a supply and a distribution efficiency issue, which means that yes, it is likely that some form of this virus will be with us, through not only 2021, but 2022 and probably beyond. Now, does that mean that we're all going to have to be locked down to some version or the other, wearing masks all the time? No, it doesn't mean that. Because as we get closer and closer to herd immunities, as we actually have better abilities to trace, and our public health system gets a little bit better because we're not so overwhelmed with people being sick, then we'll be able to do what Bangkok did, right? Bangkok, if you look at their story, they opened stuff completely up, right? It was like wide open. And anyone who's detected positive, they immediately identify, sequester, quarantine, right? Feed you. Now, we're not going to get that draconian and communistic, but they do a really nice job of separating people who are infected from the rest of the population. And because they do that so well, they're able to live pretty much like a normal life, like a truly almost normal life. So could we get to that? Maybe. But we have to get a lot more people vaccinated. We're only like at 20%, 15, 20% nationwide. There's a lot more people that need to be vaccinated. And we need to do it in a path where we don't have things like the Brazilian strain, the South African strain, making it here to the US in large numbers. We've had South African strain here in California, but so far it has not really increased in numbers. It's actually been isolated cases. and they've been identified and they haven't really multiplied. As long as that stays the case, it'll buy us time. But yeah, we're going to have some version of COVID-19 through COVID-20, COVID-21. Okay, I would guarantee you that.
If you live in a household and say you're the only person vaccinated and no one else is vaccinated, should the vaccinated person like leave and go live someplace else?
Let me make sure I'm understanding.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let me make sure I'm understanding that. All right, I don't want, this is the question one time, something that David and Jackie were asking. It was an interesting question. I think Jackie called me on the phone and I gave her an answer which wasn't too satisfactory to David. So let me make sure I'm hearing the right question.
Uh-huh.
If you have a household of people and an individual in the household, one individual gets vaccinated.
Yes.
And the others are not vaccinated.
Right.
But they're not symptomatic. They're doing everything that they're supposed to do properly, etc. Should they separate? should they separate? The answer is no. Like, you don't. I'm sorry, Sharon. I know you weren't asking for personal reasons, but in general, if households that are maintaining some reasonable precautions, and what I mean by reasonable, let me just say is this: no one's going to be perfect, but when you go out and about, you're wearing your mask, particularly when you're around other people, either at work or stores or whatever. If you're compliant with yourself wearing a mask, etc., and hand hygiene and all that other stuff, you're good. You're not going to be bringing stuff home. This is not a problem. It's a problem if folk are going out, hanging out, going to play pool somewhere. They're with their boys or the girls. Everyone can play pool, and they're sitting around with a mask. We call it Orange County style, right? Mask just over the mouth, not on their nose, and they're in some enclosed room, laughing it up, eating, and all sorts of stuff for hours and hours. You take that home, well, that's just risk. That's just unnecessary risk. So if people are being safe and vigilant, no, you do not need to separate. You do not need to, do all this stuff. There's some really interesting immunology about households that I could talk about. That's kind of fun. Just like girls or women who are roommates whose menstrual cycles all line up after a time together. There's some really interesting things that happen to people who live in the same household that changes patterns of your own physiology and your immunology and your risk. So in this case, it's good. So no, Sharon, you do not need to move or kick someone out the house if this in theory, if the person is not vaccinated. In theory, yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Doc. Good looking out.
I'm not looking out. I'm just telling you the truth. Just telling you the truth. However, the one caveat is if the person in question had a known exposure to someone who tested positive or symptomatic, they should be quarantined. And they should be quarantined the best way possible. Some people can successfully quarantine in the house. Most people have to quarantine in the backyard of the garage. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's just with an exposure. That's just with what we call a high-risk exposure. I'm available for consultation to help define what high-risk exposure might be. All right.
What is the risk of reinfection with one of the variants?
Well, that's a great question. We don't sort of know. I